This podcast is brought to you by the Fountain Bridge. Imagine an emergency that causes something like $33 billion in damage every single year.
Right.
And it physically disables over 1 billion people. It basically traps entire generations in this cycle of extreme poverty.
Yeah.
And yet, you won't see a single breaking news alert about it on your phone.
Yeah, it's completely under the radar.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are really thrilled to have you with us. Today, our mission is to unpack a massive stack of WHO reports, global health frameworks, and field data to explore a completely different kind of crisis.
It's not the kind of crisis we're used to hearing about.
No, it's not a sudden earthquake with blaring sirens. It's more like termites silently eating away at the foundation of a house. The destruction happens really slowly, totally out of sight, but the eventual structural collapse is just as devastating.
That silent foundational destruction that perfectly captures the reality of what we are examining today, neglected tropical diseases or NTDs.
Right. And we're going to look at the severe human and economic toll of these diseases, dig into some genuinely unbelievable triumphs in recent global elimination efforts, and examine a looming funding cliff that threatens to undo basically 20 years of progress.
Yeah, there's a lot on the line right now.
So let's start with the basics. Looking through these WHO reports, NTD seems to be a massive umbrella term. What actually puts a disease into this specific category?
Well, it's a diverse group of 21 preventable infectious diseases, and biologically, they're all over the map. You have viral infections like dengue, bacterial diseases like leprosy, protozoa causing Chagas disease.
That's right.
Yeah, and parasitic worms responsible for schistosomiasis. But what truly binds them together isn't their biology or taxonomy. It's poverty and sociology, because they thrive in places where basic infrastructure has just completely failed.
Exactly. You're looking at areas with unsafe water, substandard housing, and practically zero access to routine clinical care.
Right. And that environmental reality is compounded by massive global neglect. For decades, international health funding and policy have poured into what the industry often calls the big three.
Which is HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, right?
Right. And those are acute crises. They have high immediate mortality rates that demand urgent intervention. NTDs, generally speaking, well, they don't kill you quickly.
They disable you slowly.
Yeah, over years, sometimes decades. Because of that slow burn, they got pushed to the absolute basement of global health priorities.
To really understand why this matters to you and to the global community, we have to look past those high-level statistics.
Right, you need to see the human impact.
Exactly. We need to look at the daily physical devastation these diseases inflict on individual patients. I was reading about trachoma in the sources, and the mechanics of it are, well, they're horrifying.
They really are. Trachoma is a bacterial infection of the eye, but the blindness it causes isn't instantaneous. Repeated infections over years cause the inside of the eyelid to scar. And that heavy scarring eventually forces the eyelid to turn inward. So every time the patient blinks, their own eyelashes scrape against their cornea.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It is agonizingly painful. And over time, that constant scraping is what causes irreversible blindness.
And then you have schistosomiasis, which is caused by parasitic worms living in contaminated freshwater. The reports note that in children, it causes severe stunted growth and cognitive impairment.
Yeah.
But wait, why does a worm in the water cause cognitive decline?
It comes down to chronic inflammation. When those parasitic worms lay eggs inside the human body, the immune system goes into overdrive trying to attack them.
So the body is just exhausted.
Exactly. The body is pouring all its energy into fighting this constant low-grade infection instead of, directing those nutrients toward physical growth and brain development. So the child is left chronically fatigued and developmentally delayed.
That is awful. I also noticed a very recent addition to the WHO's NTD list in our stack from just December 2023, a disease called pneuma.
Pneuma is a horrific, opportunistic bacterial infection, and it primarily affects young children facing extreme malnutrition.
Right.
It causes rapid necrosis of the mouth and face.
Let's break down necrosis for a second. That essentially means the living tissue in the face rapidly dies off and rots away, right?
Yeah, that's the tragic reality of it. The immune system is so compromised by starvation that normal mouth bacteria suddenly turn destructive.
Ah.
And if caught in the very early stages, it can be stopped with simple antibiotics and nutritional support. But if it progresses, survivors are left with severe facial disfigurement that requires incredibly complex surgical rehabilitation just to allow them to eat and speak normally again.
I'm looking at this list of physical deformities. The facial scarring of noma, the visible marks of leprosy, the massive swelling of limbs caused by lymphatic filariasis.
Right.
It strikes me that these diseases don't just hurt you physically. They make your illness painfully visible to everyone around you. That has to be terrifying for a patient. Do people try to hide?
They absolutely do. And that brings us to what field workers call the hidden burden of NTDs, which is severe social stigma. The physical deformities trigger intense social ostracization.
I can imagine.
Women might be denied marriage. Men might be entirely banned from their local workforce. Children are pulled out of school not just because they are tired, but because they are bullied or feared.
So you essentially have a severely leaky roof, but you're so deeply ashamed of the visible water damage that you refuse to call the plumber. And the house just continues to rot.
That's a very accurate way to put it.
If the isolation is that profound, how do global health programs actually get people to step out of the shadows and take the medicine?
Well, it requires a fundamental shift in strategy. You can't just set up a clinic, hand out pills, and wait for people to show up. You have to actively dismantle the stigma first.
Oh, interesting.
There's a fascinating case study in the sources about a leprosy program launched in India. The organizers realized that medical intervention was totally useless without community outreach.
So what did they do?
They blanketed communities with a massive messaging campaign centered on one clear scientific fact. Leprosy is curable, not hereditary.
Oh, that completely reframes it. It dismantles the myth that a family is cursed.
Exactly. It inspired genuine optimism by proving it was a medical condition like any other and then backing that up with the medicine to actually cure it. They broke the cycle of shame. Patients finally felt safe enough to seek treatment.
That makes total sense. Because when a farmer hides in their home out of shame, or absolutely can't walk into the fields because of lymphatic filariasis, the immediate consequence isn't just personal suffering. It's an abandoned harvest.
Right.
The crops die, the family goes hungry, and suddenly a medical issue becomes a financial catastrophe for the entire village. These diseases aren't just a symptom of poverty, they are the engine driving it.
They ensure that poverty is passed down to the next generation. We talked about schistosomiasis causing cognitive impairment. Well, that child is missing school, falling behind, and losing their future earning potential.
While the adults are sidelined from the workforce?
Yeah. Guinea worm disease is a striking example of this. It involves a meter-long worm painfully emerging from the skin, often on the leg or foot.
A meter long.
Yes, the pain is debilitating, and the emergence often coincides exactly with the peak agricultural planting season.
Which is the one time of year the community absolutely cannot afford to lose their labor force.
Right. And when you zoom out to look at the macro numbers, the financial drain is staggering. Globally, conservative estimates show that at least $33 billion in household income is lost every single year due to NTD-related out-of-pocket health expenses and lost wages.
33 billion.
Yeah, and people living with certain NTDs suffer an average annualized productivity loss of 29% compared to healthy individuals.
Wait, I need to look at these WHO numbers again because I want to challenge that $33 billion figure.
Sure.
I was reading that a treatment like praziquantel, which cures schistosomiasis, costs as little as 20 cents a child per year.
That's right.
So if the cure is literally the spare change in my couch, how is the global economy bleeding $33 billion a year?
It highlights the tragic irony of how we fund healthcare. That 20-cent pill is for preventative or early-stage care. The $33 billion loss isn't coming from the cost of the pills. It's coming from a lack of access to those pills, which leads to catastrophic late-stage medical costs.
Oh, I see, because marginalized populations don't get the 20-cent intervention, so the disease is allowed to progress.
Consider Chagas disease. A person can be infected by a triatamine bug, often called a kissing bug, and the parasite can lay dormant in their body for years, sometimes decades, with zero symptoms.
Wow, decades.
Yeah, but eventually, in severe late-stage cases, it attacks the heart muscle. The only effective treatment at that point is a full heart transplant.
That is insane, from a 20-cent prevention to a heart transplant.
Exactly. Or look at advanced Bruley ulcer, which causes massive skin and bone destruction. You aren't treating that with a quick antibiotic. It requires weeks, sometimes months, of hospital care and complex skin grafts.
Right, which is incredibly expensive.
For a rural household in a developing nation, a month-long hospital stay and surgery is instantly bankrupting. You lose your income, you sell your livestock to pay the hospital bills, and the family is financially ruined.
So, realizing that this fragmented approach was causing a $33 billion hemorrhage, the global community clearly had to rethink its strategy, and the sources point to a massive strategic pivot that occurred around 2005.
Yeah, 2005 was a watershed moment in Berlin. Before this meeting, global health organizations were treating these diseases in totally isolated silos.
How so?
Well, you had a specialized guinea worm team working in a village, and then an entirely separate trachoma team working in that exact same village a month later, with their own budgets and supply chains.
Which is incredibly inefficient when resources are already stretched thin.
Completely. So the paradigm shift was grouping these diverse conditions under the umbrella term neglected tropical diseases.
Oh.
By doing this, they recognized that while the biology of the pathogens differed wildly, the geographic areas and the impoverished populations affected were identical. This allowed organizations to pool their resources and integrate their delivery strategies.
How does that actually change the logistics on the ground?
It paved the way for Mass Drug Administration, or MDA. Instead of spending enormous amounts of time and money trying to diagnose individual cases, which requires labs, microscopes, and specialists that just don't exist in remote areas, you simply treat the entire population at risk simultaneously.
Right, just treat everyone.
Because many NTDs share the same environments, health workers can bundle the medications. You give a community one package of pills once a year that protects against 3 or 4 different diseases at the same time.
But providing that volume of medicine to over 1 billion people annually? I mean, the cost of manufacturing that alone would stall the program, wouldn't it?
This is where public-private partnerships fundamentally changed the game. Pharmaceutical companies stepped up with historic, open-ended commitments.
Really?
Yeah, since 2011, they have donated almost 30 billion treatments. Merck alone has donated over 1.5 billion praziquantel tablets for schistosomiasis.
30 billion donated treatments is incredible. But our sources are also very clear that throwing pills at the problem doesn't solve it permanently. There's a heavy emphasis on wastage water, sanitation, and hygiene.
Because treating the symptom doesn't cure the environment. You can't eliminate a disease spread by contaminated water if you hand a patient a pill and send them right back to drink from the same contaminated river.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Without clean water and sanitation infrastructure, you are just guaranteeing reinfection next year.
To accelerate these elimination goals, the reports highlight some fascinating technical innovations. It's not just about boots on the ground and massive pill drops anymore. Technology is actively shortening the timeline.
Oh, a great example is coming out of Kenya right now. They're utilizing a new AI-powered skin NTDs app.
Wait, how does a smartphone replace a lab test in a remote village?
It uses advanced pattern recognition trained on thousands of clinical images. So a local community health worker who might not have extensive dermatological training snaps a photo of a patient's skin lesion.
And the app just diagnoses it.
Yeah, the app works offline, cross-references the image, and identifies the specific skin NTD with 80% diagnostic sensitivity. That's on par with a board-certified dermatologist. You bypass the need for a biopsy and a lab entirely.
That is huge. The diagnostics are getting faster, and I see the medicines themselves are becoming much more efficient. There's mention of new single-dose, triple-drug therapies for lymphatic filariasis. Why does combining 3 drugs make such a difference?
Historically, treatment required taking medication for up to 5 agonizing years to fully clear the microscopic worms from the lymphatic system.
5 years.
Yeah. But by combining 3 specific drugs, you hit the parasite's life cycle at multiple stages simultaneously. It prevents them from rebounding, which collapses the required treatment timeline from 5 years down to just 2.
So when you synthesize all of this, the 2005 paradigm shift, the efficiency of mass drug administration, billions of donated pills, AI diagnostics, and faster therapies, what are the actual results? Because looking at the WHO data, the wins are massive.
The successes over the last decade are profound. 58 countries have now successfully eliminated at least one NTD. Togo made absolute history by becoming the first country globally to eliminate 4 separate NTDs.
4 of them.
Yeah. Guinea worm, lymphatic filariasis, sleeping sickness, and trachoma.
What specifically did Togo do to pull that off?
They mastered integration and cross-border cooperation. Togo has highly porous borders where populations constantly move back and forth for trade. They realized that treating their own population was useless if the disease kept walking back across the border.
Oh, right. You have to treat the whole region.
Exactly. So they synchronized their mass drug administration campaigns with neighboring countries, ensuring the entire regional transmission cycle was broken.
And globally, guinea worm is essentially a thing of the past, right?
We are on the absolute precipice of global eradication. We went from millions of reported cases in the 1980s to just 15 human cases globally in 2024.
Wow, only 15.
Just 15. Overall, since 2010, the number of people requiring interventions for NTDs worldwide has dropped by 32%.
A 32% drop is a fantastic statistic. But I want to know what that actually looks like for the people living there. What is the tangible, real-world ripple effect of removing an NTD from a region?
Well, let's look at Niger. In 2023, Niger successfully eliminated onchocerciasis, which is commonly known as river blindness.
Okay.
The vector that transmits this disease is a specific black fly that breeds in fast-flowing rivers. Because the risk of going blind was so high, generations of people had completely abandoned the incredibly fertile lands running alongside those rivers.
Because getting near the water to farm meant risking your sight.
Precisely. But once the disease was verified as eliminated, tens of thousands of hectares of prime riverside land were suddenly safe again. Communities reclaimed the area.
That's amazing.
Yeah. What were once abandoned fly-infested zones are now thriving agricultural hubs producing rice, millet, and vegetables. Eliminating a microscopic parasite literally redrew the agricultural economy of the country.
That is the ultimate aha moment. By removing the disease, you restore the economy. But just as we're seeing these regions transform and thrive, our stack of reports pivots to a massive, immediate threat.
Yeah, it does.
A crisis that could realistically undo 20 years of this hard-fought progress before we reach the 2030 goals.
The global health community is facing a severe and sudden funding cliff. The sources impartially report on a recent dismantling of official development assistance, or ODA, for global health.
Right.
Specifically, the withdrawal of targeted funding from the United States for NTD delivery projects, alongside significant reductions from the UK and the European Union.
The numbers on the immediate fallout are tough to read.
The immediate impact of these specific ODA cuts caused the delay or cancellation of 47 mass treatment campaigns.
47 campaigns.
Yeah. And that logistical delay left 143 million people at renewed risk of infection.
And the medicines themselves, those billions of donated pills, are suddenly at risk too.
This is the most pressing logistical nightmare. The pharmaceutical companies are still donating the medicine for free, but because the delivery funding was pulled abruptly, over 55 million donated tablets are currently sitting in warehouses in Africa, at risk of expiring by the end of 2025.
That's devastating.
There is simply no budget to put fuel in the trucks and pay the health workers to physically distribute them to the villages.
Wait, so we have the medicine sitting there for free, the infrastructure's built, we've run 25 miles of a marathon, the finish line is in sight, and we're just taking our shoes off and quitting.
Basically, yeah.
Pulling the delivery funding at the last mile means those diseases are going to resurge. We are squandering decades of investment.
And compounding this funding crisis is the accelerating reality of climate change.
Because the environment itself is shifting.
Mosquitoes and sandflies, the vectors for many of these diseases, are incredibly sensitive to temperature. Warmer nights mean fewer winter die-offs for mosquito populations. As weather patterns become more extreme, these vectors are migrating into new altitudes and latitudes.
Oh, no.
Yeah, climate models are already predicting a northward shift of the dengue epidemic belt, creeping into parts of Europe and the northern United States.
So if we want to hit the WHO's 2030 roadmap targets, which includes the ambitious goal of eliminating at least one NTD in 100 countries,
yeah,
how does the strategy have to evolve? We have funding cuts and climate change working against us. What are the priority actions?
Well, the entire strategy has to pivot toward local sustainability. First, there must be a shift away from international donor dependency toward domestic ownership.
Okay.
Endemic countries have to integrate NTD funding into their own sovereign national budgets. Nigeria is leading the way here. They recently launched an NTD master plan focused specifically on scaling up their own domestic financing.
So local leadership taking the financial reins so they aren't vulnerable to foreign budget cuts.
Exactly. Second, NTD services can no longer be separate, vertical programs. They must be integrated into primary health care, pushing towards universal health coverage. A patient shouldn't have to wait for an annual mass drug campaign. They should be able to get diagnosed and treated at their local clinic any day of the year. And finally, we must adopt a One Health approach.
What does a One Health approach actually look like in practice?
It means recognizing that human health, animal health, and environmental health are fundamentally interconnected. Many of these pathogens are zoonotic. They jump back and forth between animals and humans.
Oh, wow.
Guinea worm is a perfect example. You can filter all the drinking water for the human population, but if the local village dogs are drinking from contaminated ponds and spreading the larvae back into the environment, the transmission cycle continues.
Right, because the dogs reinfect the water.
Exactly. So One Health means you monitor and treat the dogs too. You protect the entire ecosystem.
So, synthesizing all of this for you. Neglected tropical diseases are a devastating silent group of 21 infections. They feed on poverty, and they guarantee that poverty continues by stealing the health, site, and agricultural productivity of over 1 billion people.
That's exactly right.
But through an incredible paradigm shift, billions of donated pills, and dedicated local leadership, we have actually pushed several of these ancient diseases to the brink of eradication.
But that progress is incredibly fragile. The withdrawal of critical delivery funding, leaving millions of pills expiring in warehouses, combined with the expanding reach of vectors due to climate change. Well, it stands directly in the way of crossing that 2030 finish line.
Which brings us to why this deep dive matters directly to your world. Investing in the elimination of NTDs is not just an act of distant charity, it is the bedrock of global health security.
Absolutely. If recent years have taught us anything, it's that health threats know absolutely no borders. By strengthening disease surveillance systems, diagnostic labs, and community health networks for NTDs in the developing world, you are building the exact same early detection infrastructure needed to spot and contain the next emerging global pandemic. You are building global resilience.
And that leads to a final thought I want to leave you to mull over. We started by talking about how NTDs are a silent emergency, easily ignored because they happen out of sight, to marginalized populations.
Yeah.
But as climate change pushes the mosquitoes and sandflies that carry these pathogens further north into the backyards of North America and Europe,
Yeah.
will the label neglected suddenly disappear?
It forces us to ask very uncomfortable questions about how we value human health globally.
Will it truly take these diseases, arriving in our own neighborhoods, setting off the loud, breaking news alarms, for the world to finally provide the delivery funding needed to finish the job we started 20 years ago? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time.